Jalen Brooks had learned to travel the way you learn to carry something fragile, carefully, quietly, with both hands. He arrived early. He kept his documents organized. He wore clothes that didn't invite extra attention. Clean hoodie, dark jeans, sneakers that looked new enough to be respectable, but not flashy enough to be questioned. He didn't argue with TSA. He didn't joke with agents who weren't joking back. He smiled when people expected him to, even when he didn't feel like smiling. Because airports had rules, and airports also had vibes, unspoken decisions made in half a second about who seemed normal, who seemed suspicious, who was going to become an inconvenience. Jalen was not interested in becoming an inconvenience. Today mattered. He was flying from Atlanta to Chicago for a last-minute presentation that could decide whether his firm landed a long-term contract. The kind of contract that didn't just boost his resume, but changed his trajectory. His manager had been clear. "You're the strongest client-facing person we have. We need you in that room." Jalen had been flattered, then wary. Because client-facing sometimes meant, "We need you to be perfect." Perfect voice, perfect calm, perfect approachable. And in white spaces, perfection always came with extra weight for him. Still, he'd said yes. He'd packed his suit in a garment bag, printed backup copies of his deck, and saved versions to 3 places: laptop, cloud, flash drive. He'd triple-checked his boarding pass in the app and screenshotted it, because he didn't trust airport Wi-Fi to behave when the stakes were high. By the time he reached gate B-17, he had 40 minutes to spare. The terminal hummed with that constant airport noise: rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, coffee machines hissing behind the kiosks. Families clustered around charging stations. Business travelers sat with laptops open, their faces lit by spreadsheets. A couple argued softly near the window, shoulders tight and polite, as if even conflict had to stay within airline policy. Jalen found a seat near the gate and opened his email, skimming last-minute notes from his manager. The client wanted a specific set of numbers highlighted. The intro needed to be shorter. The Q&A might get aggressive. Jalen smiled once at the word aggressive. Of course it might. He closed his email and stared out at the plane through the window. White fuselage, blue tail logo, baggage carts moving like insects around it. He told himself, "Get there. Speak clearly. Be undeniable." Boarding time arrived like a shift in pressure. The gate agent's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin boarding Flight 482 to Chicago shortly. Please have your boarding passes ready." People stood immediately, crowding the lane before their group was called, like they were afraid the plane might leave without them personally witnessing it. Jalen stayed seated. He waited until his group was announced, Group 3. When it was, he stood, took a breath, and joined the line with his backpack on one shoulder and his garment bag folded neatly in his hand. Ahead of him was a white man in a blazer with noise-canceling headphones around his neck, tapping impatiently on his phone. Behind Jalen was a white couple, mid-40s, matching carry-ons, the woman's voice loud enough to be heard without trying. "I swear, if they don't give us overhead bin space, I'm going to lose it." Jalen didn't turn. He focused forward. At the scanner stood the gate agent. White woman, maybe late 30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, crisp uniform that looked untouched by the chaos around her. Her name tag read, "Emily, Customer Service Agent." Emily's smile was perfectly practiced. There, but thin. The kind of smile that made you feel like you were being managed, not welcomed. She scanned the man in the blazer ahead of Jalen. Beep. Green. "Have a great flight," Emily said brightly. The man didn't respond. He walked through like the gate belonged to him. Next passenger. Beep. Green. Enjoy. Next. Beep. Green. Then Jalen stepped forward. He held his phone out with the boarding pass pulled up. Brightness turned high. Emily didn't look at him at first. She reached out for the scanner like she'd done 100 times, then finally lifted her eyes. They flicked over Jalen's face. Quick scan, not quite rude, but not neutral either. Then they dropped to the screen. Emily scanned. Beep. But it wasn't green. The scanner made a different sound. Flat. Wrong. Emily's smile didn't move, but her eyes tightened. She said. Jalen's stomach dipped, a small cold movement. Is there an issue? Emily scanned again, slower, the same sound. Then she looked up at him, and the tone in her voice shifted slightly, from practiced to firm. It says you're not cleared to board. Jalen blinked once. Not cleared. Emily's fingers tapped the keyboard beside the scanner. What's your last name? Brooks, Jalen said. He kept his voice calm. She typed, first name. Jalen. Emily's eyes stayed on the screen. Confirmation code. Jalen read it from his pass. Emily typed again, her lips pressed together. Jalen heard the couple behind him shuffle, impatience growing. What's going on? The woman whispered, not quietly enough. Emily didn't look back. She kept her attention on Jalen like he was the source of the delay. Then she said the words that hit Jalen like a hand to the chest. You're not on the list. Jalen stared. I'm holding my boarding pass. Emily's expression didn't change. The system shows you're not eligible to board this flight. Why? Jalen asked, still calm, carefully calm. I checked in last night. I chose my seat. I'm Group 3. Emily gave him a small, tight smile. Sometimes people think they're checked in, but they're not. Jalen felt heat rise behind his ribs. He swallowed it down. I'm checked in, he said. My boarding pass is right here. It has a seat. Emily's eyes flicked down to his screen, then back up like she wasn't impressed by evidence. What seat? 12A, Jalen replied immediately. Emily typed again. A beat passed. Then she said, That seat is not assigned to you. Jalen's pulse thudded once, hard. It is. It was. Emily leaned slightly closer to her monitor, then sat back as if concluding something. It looks like you were moved, she said. Jalen held her gaze. Moved by who? Emily's voice was too casual for the impact of what she was saying. Could have been operations. Could have been an aircraft change. Could have been a seating issue. Jalen kept his expression neutral. Okay, so what seat am I in now? Emily paused. A very small pause. Then, you don't have a seat assignment. Jalen stared at her, trying to make his brain accept the sentence. No seat assignment, he repeated. Then how do I have a boarding pass? Emily's lips tightened. Sometimes the app doesn't update. It happens. Jalen felt the couple behind him press closer. He stepped slightly to the side, not wanting to be in the aisle like a problem, but he also refused to get out of line completely. I need to be on this flight, Jalen said, voice still controlled. Emily's eyes lifted, cool. Sir, everyone needs to be on their flight. The word sir landed wrong, too crisp, too corrective, like he'd already been categorized. Jalen's jaw tightened. I have an important meeting. Emily's smile sharpened. Then you should have arrived earlier to resolve issues. Jalen stared at her. He glanced at the time on the screen above the gate. Boarding had just started. The plane wasn't even half full yet. I arrived early, Jalen said. Emily sighed, not loudly, but with the perfect amount of annoyance to communicate that Jalen was taking up her time. Okay, step aside. Jalen didn't move immediately, not out of defiance, but because he recognized that phrase too. Step aside meant, you're no longer a passenger, you're a situation. Behind him, the line began to swell. People shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Emily raised her chin slightly. Sir, step aside so we can continue boarding. Jalen forced his feet to move. He stepped to the side of the boarding lane, standing near the podium where everyone could see him being separated from the flow like a flagged bag at security. Emily immediately scanned the next passenger. Beep. Green. Have a great flight. The line moved around him like water around a rock. Jalen stood there, feeling the familiar humiliation of being singled out in public, the familiar pressure to stay calm because anger would be used as proof that you deserved this. He watched 3 people board, then 5, then 10. A white man in a baseball cap fumbled with his phone and held up the line, and Emily laughed softly and helped him with no edge in her voice. A white woman argued about her carry-on size, and Emily smiled and said, "We'll figure it out." But when Emily looked at Jalen again, her face reset into that controlled firmness. Like kindness was selective. Jalen took a slow breath and spoke quietly. "Can you tell me exactly what happened to my seat?" Emily's tone was flat. "I already told you. You were moved." "I want details," Jalen said, still polite. "There should be a record, a reassignment log, something that shows when my seat was changed." Emily blinked once, and Jalen saw it, the slight surprise that he knew systems existed. "We don't have time for that right now," Emily said. Jalen's heart rate increased. He kept his voice low to avoid giving her a reason to label him disruptive. "You're telling me I can't board because I have no seat," he said. "But you also can't tell me why I have no seat." Emily's smile returned, thin. "Sir, if you don't have a seat, you can't board. That's the policy." Jalen nodded slowly. "Then put me in a seat." Emily's eyes narrowed. "The flight is full." Jalen looked past her, toward the gate screen showing available standby list. The boarding lane wasn't full yet. The plane doors were open. People were still coming. "Full?" he repeated. "You're still boarding Group 3. Emily's voice sharpened. "That doesn't mean there are seats available." Jalen's hands tightened around his garment bag. He loosened them deliberately. "Okay," Jalen said. "Then I want to speak to a supervisor." Emily's eyes flicked toward the side, toward another staff member in the background, then back to Jalen. "I am the agent at the gate," she said, like that was the end of the conversation. Jalen held her gaze. "Then I want the lead." Emily's smile hardened. "Sir, if you continue to disrupt boarding, I will have to call airport security." The sentence dropped into the space between them like a threat disguised as procedure. Jalen felt something cold settle in his chest. There it was, the escalation path. The way you got turned from a customer into a risk. He looked around. A few passengers in line had noticed. Some looked away quickly. One older white man stared openly, eyebrows raised, the expression saying, "What did he do?" Jalen hadn't done anything. That was the point. He lowered his voice even further. "I'm not disrupting anything. I stepped aside like you asked. I'm asking for help." Emily's eyes stayed hard. "I'm helping by telling you you can't board." Jalen swallowed, then said carefully, "I paid for that seat. I checked in. Something changed. I need you to open the seat reassignment record and show what happened." Emily stared at him for a beat too long. Then she turned back to the scanner, calling, "Next!" The line surged again. Jalen stood there very still while his flight, his meeting, his job, his respect began to slip away behind a glass wall of policy language. He could already feel the panic trying to rise. He pushed it down. Not because he wasn't scared, because he knew fear made you rush. Rush made you messy. Messy made you easy to dismiss. Jalen reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, not to argue with Emily, but to arm himself. He opened his screenshot of the boarding pass from last night. There it was, 12A. He opened his email receipt. There it was. Seat selection confirmed. 12A. He opened the airline's app again and refreshed. Now his boarding pass showed seat. Blank. Jalen stared at the blank space, jaw tight. So the system had changed it. And the system, somewhere, had a history of that change. A log, a record, a timestamp. Jalen looked up at Emily, who was scanning passengers with brisk efficiency, and felt his resolve harden into something steady. He wasn't going to beg. He wasn't going to yell. He was going to make her open the record. Because if the seat reassignment log existed, the truth existed, and Jalen was not letting "you're not on the list" be the final story of his day. Jalen watched the boarding line thin, the way a door closes slowly, quietly, almost politely, until you realize you're on the wrong side of it. Group 3 was nearly finished. The gate area looked less chaotic now, more organized. Most of the people with rolling bags had already disappeared down the jet bridge. The remaining passengers were the late ones and the nervous ones. Jalen stood beside the podium like a marked item, not quite removed, but clearly separated. Emily kept scanning passes in a steady rhythm. Beep, green. Beep, green. Enjoy your flight. Have a great one. Every time she looked back at Jalen, her face reset into that thin, controlled neutrality. Not hostility, something worse. The kind of professionalism that made you feel crazy for thinking anything unfair was happening. Jalen took a slow breath and checked the overhead monitor. Final call in 12 minutes. His mouth went dry. He opened his phone again and pulled up his screenshot from the night before. Boarding pass with seat 12. A clearly printed. He pulled up the confirmation email with the same seat selection. He highlighted the date and time. Then he did one more thing. He opened the airline's chat support inside the app. It was a long shot, but he wasn't waiting for Emily to decide he deserved help. The chatbot asked questions. Jalen typed quickly. At gate. Agent says I'm not on list. My seat 12A disappeared. Needs seat restored. Please check seat reassignment history. The bot spun, then a message appeared. Connecting you to an agent. Jalen's eyes flicked back to Emily. She was still scanning, still moving people past him. He stepped closer to the podium again, careful with his posture, careful with his voice. Emily, Jalen said quietly, I have screenshots and the seat confirmation email showing I was assigned 12A last night. The app now shows blank. That change happened inside your system. There should be a seat reassignment history. Emily didn't look at the screenshots. She looked at Jalen's face. I told you, she said, clipped. You were moved. Jalen nodded. Then the log will show when and why. Emily's jaw tightened. Sir, I am not opening internal logs because you think you had a different seat. Jalen's voice stayed low and even. It's not what I think. It's what I can prove. And right now you're preventing me from boarding based on a change you won't verify. Emily's eyes narrowed. You're holding up the gate. Jalen glanced at the boarding lane. No one was waiting. The scanner was idle for the first time. I'm not holding up anything, Jalen said, still calm. There's no line. Emily's cheeks flushed slightly, irritation leaking through the professionalism. She looked past Jalen toward the end of the gate area, toward where another uniformed staff member stood near a cabinet, talking to a flight attendant. Jalen followed her gaze. The other staff member was a white man in a slightly different uniform jacket, older, more confident. The kind of person who moved like he was used to being obeyed. Emily called out, Dan, can you come here a second? The man approached, expression already tired. His badge read, Dan. Gate lead. Dan looked at Emily first. What's up? Emily spoke fast, shaping the story immediately. Passenger isn't cleared to board. No seat assignment. He's arguing about a screenshot. Jalen felt his jaw tighten. Arguing. The word was always used like a stain. Jalen spoke before Dan could accept Emily's framing. He kept it respectful, precise. "Hi," Jalen said. "My name is Jalen Brooks. I checked in last night and had seat 12A. I have the confirmation email and a screenshot of the boarding pass showing 12A. Today the seat is blank. Emily says I was moved, but she won't open the seat reassignment history. I just need you to check the reassignment log so we can restore my seat or assign me an equivalent seat." Dan looked at Jalen's phone now, not with curiosity, but with assessment. "Let me see," Dan said. Jalen held the phone out, screen brightness high. He showed the screenshot with 12A, then the email confirmation. Dan's eyes flicked to the timestamps. Dan's face changed slightly. Not dramatic, just a subtle shift from "this guy is confused" to "this might be real." Emily crossed her arms. People screenshot old boarding passes all the time. Jalen held Dan's gaze. "That screenshot is from last night. Timestamp matches the email, and the app changed it this morning. That's a system action." Dan turned to Emily. "Did you check seat history?" Emily's tone sharpened. "He doesn't have a seat, so he can't board." Dan's eyes narrowed. "That's not what I asked." Emily hesitated, and Jalen saw it. She hadn't checked. She'd decided. Dan stepped behind the podium and typed quickly into the gate computer. His fingers moved with practiced speed. Jalen watched the screen indirectly in the reflection of the glass partition. Not enough to read details, but enough to see menus opening, tabs switching. Dan clicked once, twice. Then he paused. Just long enough. "Okay," Dan said quietly. Emily leaned in. "What?" Dan's eyes stayed on the monitor. "There's a seat reassignment entry." Jalen's pulse jumped. Dan scrolled. "Looks like an operations reassignment, around 7:18 a.m. Emily's mouth tightened. "So he got moved, that's what I said." Dan glanced at her. "No, it says he was moved out of 12A and then placed into a hold status." Jalen blinked. "Hold status?" Dan nodded slightly. "It's what happens when a seat is taken for a special accommodation, crew repositioning, equipment swap, something like that. But there's supposed to be a follow-up assignment." Emily's face went stiff. "The flight is full." Dan didn't answer her. He kept scrolling. Then he said the sentence that made Jalen's stomach drop and tighten at the same time. "Your seat got reassigned to another passenger at 7:23. Jalen's voice stayed controlled, but it carried. "So someone took my seat." Dan nodded slowly, not looking up. "Seat 12A is now under—" He paused. "A different name." Emily's tone turned defensive. "That happens. We have to accommodate." Jalen cut in, steady. "Then where is my replacement seat?" Dan's jaw tightened. "It should be here." He clicked again, faster now. A small silence settled. The kind of silence that meant the system wasn't backing them up anymore. Dan leaned closer to the screen. Then he muttered, mostly to himself, "It never auto-assigned." Emily snapped. "So what? We can't invent seats." Dan finally looked up at her, and there was authority in his expression now, irritation aimed at the right direction. "We can fix it," Dan said. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Dan cut her off, firm. "We can fix it because this was a system reassignment that left him in limbo. That's on us." Jalen stood very still, feeling something sharp in his chest. Not victory, recognition. He'd been right. He'd been blocked anyway. And he'd been treated like a problem for insisting on the process that proved it. Dan turned to Jalen. His tone was more human now. "Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry. You were pulled from 12A for an ops reason. But the follow-up seat assignment didn't finalize. Emily should have called me sooner. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. I was boarding a flight. Dan didn't look at her. He typed quickly. "We're going to get you on." Jalen's eyes flicked to the monitor above them again. "Final call in 7 minutes." Dan clicked into a seat map. "There's one seat left, last row window." Jalen didn't care where he sat. He cared that he wasn't being erased. "I'll take it," Jalen said. Dan nodded. "Okay." He typed, then printed a new boarding pass. The printer spit out paper. Dan tore it off and handed it through the slot. "Seat 34A, Dan said. "You're cleared." Jalen took the paper. He looked at it, then at Dan. "Thank you." Dan nodded once. "Go now. We'll get you down the jet bridge." Jalen stepped toward the scanner. Emily held out her hand as if to stop him, then pulled it back. Her face was tight. Dan scanned the new pass himself. Beep. Green. And just like that, the system that had treated Jalen like he didn't exist now admitted he did. As Jalen walked past the podium, Emily spoke, quiet but sharp, meant to sting without being loud enough to be unprofessional. "You could have missed the flight with all that." Jalen stopped. Not long enough to cause a scene, just long enough to choose his words. He turned slightly, keeping his voice low and controlled. "I almost missed the flight because my seat was taken, and no one checked the history until I insisted." Emily's face flushed. "That's not what happened." Jalen held her gaze. "The log said what happened." Dan cleared his throat, a warning that the conversation needed to end. Jalen nodded and turned away. He walked down the jet bridge with his heart still pounding, not from running, but from the pressure of staying calm under accusation. Inside the plane, the flight attendant smiled and gestured toward the back. "Your seat is all the way down." Jalen moved past rows of settled passengers, white faces, tired faces, faces already in flight mode. He slid into 34A, shoved his backpack under the seat, and finally let his shoulders drop. He stared out the window, watching the ground crew move below. His phone buzzed. The airline chat agent finally connected. "Agent, we see an ops seat reassignment occurred and left you unassigned. Has the gate resolved this?" Jalen stared at the message for a moment. Even the chat agent, somewhere far from the gate, could see it instantly in the record. Jalen typed back, "Yes." Gate lead opened the reassignment log and reissued pass. "Please document that I was improperly blocked from boarding until log was checked." He hit send, then took a screenshot of the chat. Because he didn't trust "resolved" to mean "forgotten." He closed his eyes and breathed, slow. He was on the plane. He would make his meeting. But he wouldn't forget the feeling of standing by that podium while people flowed around him, like he didn't belong in the system until the system was forced to read its own history. And he wouldn't forget how quickly policy became a threat when he asked for proof. The seat reassignment log hadn't just cleared him to board. It had exposed the truth. He wasn't not on the list. He was removed, then left behind, until someone finally opened the record that proved it.